Good evening. It's 5:30 PM on Wednesday, October 30th, 2024, and this special meeting of the Sandpoint City Council is now called to order in the council chambers at 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am Mayor Jeremy Grimm presiding. Also present are Council President Deb Rule, Councilor Kyle Schreiber, Pam Duquette, and Rick Howard. Schreiber, Dick and Spiro are not present. If everyone will please stand, we'll recite the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. As noted on the agenda, this is a special meeting has been called for the purpose of a work session between the mayor, council, city staff, and some training and conversation on parliamentary procedures and meeting protocol. There will be no deliberation or discussions on any matter, no opportunity for the public to comment this evening. I will now yield the floor to our legal counsel, Zach and Fonda.
Thank you. All right, I'll begin by just saying that I want this to be an informal discussion. I have a little PowerPoint, which frankly, I kind of constructed out of this little pamphlet right here, which really hits the nuts and bolts of parliamentary procedure. But feel free to chime in with thoughts, questions, observations. Mr. Mayor, feel free to chime in with your input. Same with you, Madam Clerk, and same with you, Ms. Choker.
Well, thank you. I can't help myself.
So we turn to the next page.
Yeah, if we could.
No,
Well,
you don't
yes,
get
of course, you were checking.
Properly.
You may have questions.
Thank you. All right.
While Ms. Clerk is doing that, and I'm deliberately not using people's names because I'll get into why in just a second, but the purpose of the parliamentary procedure is just to maintain the process. It really helps the clerk when in creating a record. It really helps if anything gets litigated to have a clean record where people aren't talking over each other. It really helps with order. I'm sure some of you are familiar with other political entities in the area and how order can it's easy to lose track of how important it is to maintain order. And if you stick to the parliamentary procedure set forth in Robert's rules, that's the best way to just maintain the order. This book was less than $15. I think it was like $13 or $14 on Amazon. It's a very, very fun read. If anybody's interested, you're always welcome to borrow this copy too.
You're expected to memorize it by the next meeting.
But it's very dense, and there are requirements in there that I guess, in my opinion, and this is purely my opinion, are probably not necessary to follow. For example, you're supposed to stand every time you speak, and I just don't think there's certainly no precedence for that here, and I just don't think that we should be focusing on upsetting up kind of the process that we already have. So I think it's worth keeping in mind that this is sort of, we want to maintain substance over form. And so when there are minor procedural errors or issues, as long as the substance of the issue is taken care of, I don't think that we need to concern ourselves with the form. But there are certainly times when we need to maintain procedural order, and it can become very important. Can you turn to the next page? Yep. So this is just basically a table of contents of what I'm going to discuss. Basic principles, which I more or less just kind of touched on. I'm going to discuss the types of motions. I'm going to discuss how primarily the mayor manages the meetings, challenges, practices, etc. And then Robert's Rules is officially codified. So a lot of cities in the area have just say they follow normal parliamentary procedure, but Robert's Rules is officially codified, which means that this book is part of city code technically. So that's worth just keeping in the back of our minds. I think I just touched on this kind of why we use the parliamentary procedure. It is really important to create a clear record because really anything that we do can hit the courts. And when we do that, everything everyone says needs to be transcribed, and the transcriber needs to know who's saying what. So,
and they don't always have the benefit of the video, right?
Correct.
So is it, I mean, I imagine, and I'll try, important to say, when someone's speaking, I acknowledge who's speaking. So the transcriber know, oh, that's not Kyle, it's Joel.
That's very important, and that's set forth in the rules, that in order to have the floor, you need to ask the mayor for the floor, and then the mayor needs to recognize you, and then you have the opportunity to speak. And that maintains order. It maintains people talking over each other and interrupting, and then it absolutely helps with the record, so the transcriber can clearly tell who's speaking.
And every public hearing is required to create a transcribable record. So it's important for every meeting, and you should practice this all the time, but specifically in a public hearing, if there is a petition for judicial review, we have to send that audio out to a transcriptionist, to a court reporter, and they have to be able to identify who's speaking, as the mayor indicates. Really, really critical in public hearings.
So these are just the principles of parliamentary procedure. It actually kind of, when you see it on paper, it's just like, yeah, duh, like this is exactly the way we do it. It's based on majority rule, but also protection of the minority. We want to make sure the minority's position is heard, and nobody gets frankly pushed around. I won't read these. I won't read the list, but this is essentially the principles of why we do this, why we maintain this procedure. Well, so there's one thing, I guess I'd skip this on the basic principles. There's one thing that I want to do a better job maintaining, and that's a certain level of formality, which is why I've been deliberately referring to everybody by their title rather than their name. I have a little bit of an allegory here. When I lived in Korea, I lived there for 3 years, and I knew two people that were 10 years apart. And the Korean language is very structured by age. So these two people were Korean. They were in a platonic friendship, but they were very close. They chose to speak English because they could get closer to each other than they could if they spoke Korean. Well, we're trying to do the opposite. I mean, I certainly encourage informal relationships and stuff when we're not on the record, but when we're on the record, there's sort of an emotional, like block, if you will, when you're using people's titles and using people's formal names than when you're saying their first name. And it's as clear as, like, if I just go Honda, it's so easy to do, but if I say Ms. Job, it's so hard to do. So those clear lines it just allows us to not slip into that sort of argumentative mode that is easy to do when you become informal. And so when we use titles, so for example, you shouldn't be saying you to the mayor, you should be saying Mr. Mayor. And I don't know, Mr. Mayor, how you feel about this, but the book says the mayor shouldn't even refer to himself as I. So just keeping that those titles, certainly a judge would never refer to themselves as I, they would always refer to themselves as the court. So you have that in the courtroom as well, but that's something to just keep in the back of your mind, that it's a little bit stuffy, I think, sometimes to use the titles, but it is really important because it allows us to, it's just one more block to not have us degrade into sort of arguments that's easy to do when we sort of cross that line into informality.
And
So,
to keep the emotion out of our arguments, and to make sure that our debate and our positioning is based on the facts and the standards. And when you will find, if you practice this in your profession or your everyday life, when you stop using the word I or you to start a sentence, the emotion will drop off in the argument or position you're taking. It makes it personal, and you need to depersonalize it.
So the roles of the mayor, again, when you sit through enough meetings, you kind of get the grip on what the mayor does, but the mayor really just kind of facilitates the meeting. It's very important that the mayor or the board chair, because this go for all board meetings as well, remains impartial, even if they have a vote. So for example, the board chair for the Planning and Zoning Commission has a vote, but they should be remaining impartial. And I don't want to say the mayor doesn't have a vote. Of course, it's a tie-breaking vote. And then recognizing the speakers so that the floor is granted to that person, and that person only speaks one at a time. And then it states motions, breaks ties, and announces results. And then the next one is the roles of the council members. The council members are the body. So you are the decision-making body, the legislative body here. And your job is to make motions, debate the issues, vote, and then of course raise points of order. So if you have any questions about a procedural issue that seems more than just substantive, like, oh, he didn't stand when he spoke, I think it's important to raise the point of order. If that's brought up, then, Ms. Clerk or I will reference the rules of procedure, and I will be bringing these to our hearing moving forward so that I can try to find an answer for you, and not have to just shoot from the hip, to avoid situations where we are violating procedural, process. And then, of course, the role of the clerk is very important. These meetings can't be done without a clerk. They maintain the record, they maintain the minutes. They also, can answer points of order. So,
And on the issue of tracking motions and votes for the clerk, it's really important to make a concise motion. So there has been a tendency for our motions to sort of degrade into our position. That's not the point. You're making a motion to approve or a motion to deny, that is your position. No argument should belong in your motions. And no, I'm making this motion because. You've already stated your because at that point, if you've deliberated, or you're going to have an opportunity for more of a because in debate after the motion is made and seconded. So motions need to be clearer. Nothing's harder for Melissa than to try to interpret what you actually mean by your motion. And you've even heard us in the past say, okay, if I understand you correctly, this is your motion. We're helping her with the minutes and with what the actual motion is that's being voted on. So in a hearing process, you shouldn't come prepared ahead of time with a motion because you're hearing the evidence that night and then deciding whether you're going to approve or deny, but be jotting down some notes of what your motion is going to be if you think you're going to be the one to make a motion or you want to be the one to make a motion, and try to keep those as concise as possible.
and just to expand on that a little bit, it makes the record very clear, and it does, that way the clerk isn't obliged to paraphrase your motion. Because what it needs to be is the motion that's made on the record. So that helps the clerk as well.
Do you guys have questions on that?
Not on that, but can I go back one slide just on the point of order? And so let's think back 2 or 3 council meetings ago when we had the outcome of why we're here, kind of that meeting. So if one of the council members knew that what Jeremy was trying to do was violating the rules, we would have asked for a point of order
Yes,
to
clarify.
And seek guidance whether or not that was the proper step or not.
Basic, yeah,
Okay.
point of order is essentially saying, is this a proper procedure?
Got it.
That's exactly what, yeah. That's
Yep.
exactly what you do with it.
Okay.
And it is kind of, I mean, I shoulder a lot of the burden for letting that slide. I thought it was the right process. So, I don't want to, not have that slip there, but, it is kind of on council to raise those points of order as well. I mean, it is up to council to maintain the proper procedure as long as.
Is the clerk or legal allowed to raise a point of order?
Yes.
And you've heard Melissa say that before. I've heard Melissa say that. Mr.
Yeah, I
Mayor,
will
point
call
of-
out point of order. And I need to clarify something, or I think something needs to be clarified. If we do need to clarify a procedure, is it appropriate to recess the meeting in order to do that? It's okay for us to recess for a little bit, take a break, for the parliamentary folks to take a look at it, and then bring the meeting back.
So yes,
Okay.
so later on, that's exactly a good opportunity for a recess, which is one of the motions that we'll be discussing. That's a privilege motion. It takes precedence over all other motions. And that would be an exact example of when it could be done. And frankly, it should be done. Because it wouldn't really be fair to me or Melissa to have to be thumbing through Robert's Rules of Order when everybody's
Everybody's
looking
staring
and
at
breathing
you.
down our neck, so.
What's the answer?
Right. So,
Well, but you've got that memorized, so I know you've got it right.
So yes. And so these are the types of motions. I did talk briefly about the process for motions, but I'll get more into that in detail. But the main motion is it's the one that we're all familiar with. It brings the substantive issue to the table. There are lots and lots of subsidiary motions, which I'll get into, that will make your head spin. But for the purposes of here, the main motion, it requires a second, it's debatable and amendable. Majority vote under most circumstances. There are certain circumstances when it can be less than a majority, they're few and far between, and then there's slightly more circumstances when it's a 2/3 vote required, which is a little bit more common, but those are the characteristics of a main motion, and it's really pretty simple. It's the thing you guys have been doing this whole time. But we'll move into the other types of
And Zach,
motions here.
before we leave
Yes.
this, so once we ask for a motion and we get a second, we can still debate after that before we go to a vote, correct?
Yes, so and that's what the points 1, 2, and 3
Three are.
and I will get into this, but when the motion is made, and seconded, so before a motion is made, it can be amended by the mover. It can be seconded and still be amended by the mover. It's not actually on the floor until it gets, recognized by the chair. And so, but it can be, I can say, I move to do X, Y, Z. Actually, never mind, I'm not ready for that. And I can repeal that motion unilaterally if I'm the motion maker before it gets recognized by the chair. But by the time it gets recognized by the chair, then it's up to the assembly. So once the chair puts it on the floor for debate, then it has to be a majority vote to bring it off the table or do anything from there.
But you're gonna hear Zach specifically use the term debate because that's what's used in Robert's Rules of Order, which is what you do after a second is made. There is a difference between deliberation and debate. So you have a lot of discussion before a motion is made.
Yeah.
A deliberation is gaining information that helps you decide what your vote is going to be. The debate then is, this is how I'm going to vote and here is why. And so those are very different, and you should not be, I'm using the word you, right? I'm violating all the rules. You should not be just regurgitating all of the deliberation that you already had in your debate. Your debate is just, this is how I intend to vote and this is why. Maybe somebody else will agree with that, maybe they won't, but it's kind of giving the preview, if you will, of what the vote is going to look like. Maybe somebody changes their mind, maybe they don't. But the deliberation is information gathering and discussion to help you come to a vote, how you're gonna vote.
We've kind of mixed those, well, we
Yes.
probably bring deliberation into the debate
Correct,
far too much.
yes. And again, you don't have to all agree. So do your deliberation, deliberation is where you're asking questions of each other, generally, because you're seeking more information to really understand. And then when you do your debate, and I love the part, I'm not gonna steal Zach's thunder on debate. But your debate should be really relatively short.
I have a question for you, and this is a good time. So is it deliberation before, while the staff presentation is still going? So that's during the deliberation
Yeah.
period?
Or immediately thereafter, when they're asking questions of staff, and then they sort of start asking questions of each other.
Mhm.
Public hearing deliberations
Sure.
different than legislative deliberations. We also want to be very careful with that. But yes, deliberation is conversation necessary or information gathering necessary to help you decide what your decision is.
So, and on that note, I want to talk about kind of different ways to gather information. We should be objectively gathering information.
Yes.
And not asking kind of like leading questions or argumentative questions. And an example of that is objectively gathering information is, what color is the sky? That's an open-ended question that doesn't preclude or doesn't elicit an answer. Sort of a leading question would be, is the sky blue? An argumentative question would be, the sky's blue, isn't it? We need to keep those in mind when we're asking our questions, and we need to be objectively gathering information, especially when it comes to when we're asking questions of staff. There's lots of reasons for that, not the least of which is that you can be incurring liability for making all the kind of trying to gather information that's not on point with your decision making and not on point with why you should be making the decision. And then later on, if you don't follow whatever the rubric is for the reasons you should have made that decision. This is more for like subdivisions and stuff like that. It just can expose the city to liability. So it's just worth keeping that in mind.
This is also probably a good time to talk about, questions of staff are not intended to be an opportunity for you to grandstand or to politically align. Remember that a council position, once you're elected or appointed, is an apolitical position. And so it is not your job from the dais any longer, once you're elected, to talk about your constituents. You represent the entire city. not selective groups, and your job is to make decisions that are in the best interest of the entire city. And so questions of staff is not a time to be asking questions that are just designed to advance a political position or a philosophical way of thinking or any sort of political alignment. They should be information gathering only. And that you will create liability if you go down this road of utilizing the dais or grandstanding or entering into question and answer periods with staff members, where it's really outside the scope of the standards of approval that you should be looking at.
And Fonda, in that case, then any council member could call for a point of order? Is that the,
So Zach's gonna talk a little bit about how to rein the process back in, or when you believe that maybe somebody is in a dangerous territory.
okay,
But the short answer is yes.
okay.
So deliberations, there doesn't need to be a motion to deliberate.
No. No, so for instance, when a public hearing ends and you have asked questions of the applicant and staff, and you've heard your public comment, and the public hearing closes immediately, there's oftentimes an opportunity to just sort of express your initial thoughts. That's a deliberation, where everybody's sort of getting their initial thoughts, they're asking questions, maybe a little bit of each other, but really getting each other's initial thoughts before a motion is made.
So I have a question. You're saying that's for public hearing? Because Zach, legal has just said that motion is made and seconded and then deliberated.
Nope, the
Debate.
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 Debate is after your motion second, deliberation is
Okay.
before.
Any other questions? So moving on to other types of motions. We can just skip this one. Here we go, subsidiary motion. So these are the main subsidiary motions here. So someone can make a motion, it's on the table, it's up for debate. And then this happens often. You kind of decide, we want to tweak this motion, or, maybe we need a little more time. These are the things that you can do. You can amend the motion, which, of course, I recommend that we don't amend it twice. And I think before the complicated amendments, I mean, if you're starting to sense that the amendment gets a little clunky or complicated, I recommend rescinding the motion and starting over. But that's another thing you can do. It's a subsidiary motion where it's on the table. So it's been recognized, it's been motioned, seconded, and then put on the floor by the mayor. This has to be done by majority vote at this time. So someone has to move to amend the motion to include a word or something like that for simple amendments. I do think when the amendments get more complex, you should move to rescind the motion. It's perfectly fine to explain. I feel like this is getting a little clunky. I think we should just start from scratch, rescind the motion, start with a new motion that incorporates these amendments that we're trying to talk about here. I think that would probably sit well with most of the council members, and you can just start from scratch, rescind the motion and start over.
So they have to make a motion to rescind, have it seconded, and vote on that?
Yes,
Okay, so the person who made the motion and the person who seconded the motion can't just rescind unilaterally. There has to be a vote on it to rescind.
that's my reading, yes, and which was not my understanding before I took a deep dive into this.
And the person that makes the rescind motion, does that have to be the person that made the main motion?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either, and
So we
Because
have been,
everybody's voting.
because everybody's voting on it, because we've been operating under the person who made the motion and the person who seconded could essentially withdraw.
Yeah,
Not technically correct.
okay,
Anybody can make a motion, to make a motion to rescind, have it seconded, and everybody votes on it.
So it's not a withdrawal.
Correct,
Gotcha.
correct.
okay. So in that case, then everybody would vote to rescind it,
Yes.
then we'd come
Then
back,
start over.
start all over.
And it
Okay.
can actually, so when it's motioned and seconded, but not put on the table by the mayor, then it can be withdrawn. If it's been seconded, then both the second and the person making the motion have to withdraw the motion. If it's been made, then it can just be withdrawn without being.
This is why healthy deliberations are so important, because if you have healthy, robust deliberations that aren't just argumentative and trying to browbeat somebody else into your way of thinking, then what the motion is going to be is more clear. And then we're not trying to get somebody else piping in to change the motion and amend the motion, or we're not getting convoluted motions.
Okay, so after that's rescinded, it has to be agreed upon by 2/3.
It's a majority to rescind.
The only thing that has to be agreed upon by 2/3 that is up on this slide is call for the question. So, and I'll get to this later, but the process for the conversation, if there's one person that's, say, grandstanding and everybody else is just like, get this over with, you can call for the question, which means, let's put it to vote. That takes 2/3 majority to just end debate immediately and put it to vote. But every other motion up there, limiting or extending debate, included, are just majority vote.
And anybody can call for the question?
Any counselor can call for the question, but you cannot.
The mayor cannot, okay. And that was the error that we had. The other.
And the 2/3.
Yeah.
Can the mayor, as the facilitator of the meeting, though, keep council members' deliberations on subject target?
Yes, absolutely. And the
Okay.
mayor can also entertain a motion to call for the question.
That's what I was gonna
Yes.
ask. He can
Oh,
entertain a
okay,
motion.
you
He
could
could,
entertain.
he could
okay.
seek out a motion.
That's like ding, 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 ding.
I have two questions on that. So 6-person council, you need 4 votes to be a majority, but wouldn't that also be 2/3?
Yes.
So really, the
It's the
only
same.
situation would be if it was 3 and 3 and then the mayor was breaking the tie, that would not be
Well, somebody was
2/3.
absent.
That would be the realistic.
It's somebody's
Oh,
absent.
Okay. And then the other question is, if someone has the floor, you can't interrupt them to call for the question. It's not like a point of order where you can stop someone in the middle of their conversation.
And I think that's why it does take a 2/3 vote, because you
You
can't
can't.
interrupt them, call the
Okay,
question.
that was not my understanding.
Let me,
I mean, isn't that somebody in the Senate floor with the filibuster, they're talking for
Yeah.
hours and hours and hours. Somebody can call for the question.
That's the whole
that's the
point,
point.
and that's why it requires 2/3.
But Kyle, I'll circle the, Counselor Shriver, I'll circle.
Ah!
Thank you.
So go back to the incident walk me through the proper way that should have happened. So one of the council members could have called for the
Or
question.
the mayor could have said, I
Or-
will entertain a motion from a council member to call for the question.
And so he could call for that. And then if he got a council member to then call for the
Make the
question.
motion second and 2/3 approval.
Got it.
So,
So we weren't that far off.
No. Well, just a step short.
It's-
I had a comment, and I don't know, Melissa and I are the only ones that really have been here, but it seemed like at some point we turned to making motions and then turning into these lengthy discussions, whereas historically, when I was on the council, we would have a lot of that discussion, and then a motion would be made, and then the debate was more concise and appropriate, and then the vote happened. And then at some point, it changed to, no, we need to make motions before we have these bigger, longer discussions. And
I do
is
remember
that
the
your
history of that.
historical recollection? Because I felt like the meetings worked better the way that we're now saying they should have
think-
always stayed the way that they were. And I don't know why that happened or how that happened. but
It happened with a couple of city attorneys ago.
Mhm.
And I remember when it happened.
Okay.
And that was when actually he said we could do it the way we're talking about now. Because there was this understanding from council or from others, and that's why it came to a council meeting and the question was posed. Because there was this understanding that you had to have a motion and a second in order to
Discuss.
debate or discuss or deliberate, all the
Right.
good words. And he said it's not necessary. You can deliberate, you can make a motion and second, you can further debate if you need to for a bit, but then you move forward. So the way that Fonda and Zach have laid it out is the way that that Will Harrington laid it out as well.
Was this?
Which is the way that I was used to, I think, where
Yeah.
we would do all the discussion, then the motions would be made because all the confusion was kind of out of the way. And then there might be some small debate after the motion was on the table, but I remember voting pretty rapidly
The
after
change-
motions were made.
Coincide with the timing of the adoption of Robert's Rule of Order.
It,
I don't remember that. but-
Robert's rules were adopted not that long ago. We had Robert's rules, then some other parliamentary procedure was adopted for a while from the state of Washington, I think. And then we brought Robert's rules back
I
not
do
that
remember
long
that.
ago.
I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that what you're talking about too is there is this, and I think it's not just in our group, in our organization, but in other organizations, the thought behind the motion in the second is this sometimes, is that is the item, is the issue even worth debating without emotion? Is there any interest in even moving forward with it?
Mhm.
And taking all this time and all this effort
Mhm.
without knowing that there is interest.
Mhm.
And that's why in a lot of organizations, they will, you don't discuss or debate until after there's been a motion in a second to indicate, okay, this is valid, we're moving forward with this.
Mhm.
And that was some of the confusion back then.
Yeah.
When he came forward, he said, that's just not how we work and not how, all organizations work. And so you're welcome to deliberate and discuss ahead of a motion, mostly because our agenda's set. We know
Right.
we know that this is an issue that needs to be brought forward, that you do need to debate, you need to deliberate.
That's
So
been determined ahead of time
Precisely.
because it's city government.
Yep.
It's not just a board of a nonprofit organization.
And just like one person bringing something to the meeting,
Mhm.
and maybe they need to determine whether the group really wants to move forward with that, which is not how we function.
Cause I thought it got messier after we changed to having all the debate and making the motion first, cause
And
sometimes
how
the
many
motion
times-
wasn't appropriate
Right.
and then all the motion starts to get changed and it gets all muddy again.
And how many times did you hear, I'll go ahead and make a motion for the purpose of debate? We used to say that a lot.
Well, that's how you avoid the amended motions and all the subsidiary
Right,
motions.
I agree.
When during the deliberation phase,
Yes.
you kind of iron out what you're going to decide on, regardless of how you feel about it. And then you make a motion and then you,
It felt more streamlined to me.
Yeah.
And even if you feel split in your deliberations, then one side or the other needs to make a motion and see what happens with it. If it fails, then the other side's gonna make the opposite motion and it's gonna go forward. So
Mhm.
you still have the opportunity for one side or the other to prevail, depending on where you sit. But a motion needs to be made and carried all the way through, even if you're split. The purpose of deliberation, like I said, is not to gain unanimity or to browbeat each other into your way of thinking. It's to really work your way through your findings of why you feel, according to the standards of approval that have been put in front of you, you intend to vote one way or another. And to really flesh out your facts that support the findings you want to make, especially in public hearings, but that even applies in legislative decision making.
Well, and in legislative decision-making, like with resolutions, for instance, or an ordinance, isn't the default that it's someone making a motion to approve, and then there's a vote or yes or no? It's not generally a motion to deny a resolution, which is not what staff seeking an approval of a resolution to move forward with something. And so the default motion is motion to approve.
and one of the reasons for that is that way you're not dealing with a double negative, where you vote yes on a motion to deny. And, you know, that-
5 hours into a meeting and we know what's up.
So you walked us through, when we're in debate, we can, I guess, curtail the length of debate through a call for the question.
There's also go on.
Yeah, I'll get to this. In fact,
But how about to curtail deliberation?
So to curtail deliberation, that I didn't catch that distinguishment, so I'll have to circle back with you on that,
Okay.
because that's a good question and we need to know that. But no person should spend more than 10 minutes debating or deliberating, I would say as well, although the word debate is the one that I saw. And if we're distinguishing those words, I'll have to see whether that's also for deliberations, but that's the bottom line rule, 10 minutes.
Because I can sense, since the mayor, he's presiding over the meeting, he's also trying to be aware of the citizens' time commitments as well. And so if he's starting to see that get extraordinarily long, they're falling asleep. Does he have the ability then to go, curtail that or?
I would say yes. I mean, the mayor has a lot of control over these meetings,
Mhm.
but in answer to your first question, how to end deliberations, just make the motion.
And the mayor would say, I'm going to entertain a motion on that.
And to be equitable, I mean, as I read the rules, correct me if I'm wrong. I should go through there's the end of the information. I should ask each council or have each council member speak once. And then once everyone said one thing, maybe up to 10 minutes, and there's an opportunity for someone to say a second.
So the rules provide you only get to speak once.
Yeah.
So, and it's the maker of the motion gets to speak, and then the maker of the motion gets to speak last. So the maker of the motion speaks first and last. But other than that, everybody only gets to speak once with no interruptions, with no questions or challenges. You just get a chance to say your piece.
Mhm.
And then it moves to the next person. And it doesn't have to, the rules don't provide that it has to be in order of who's on. It's who asks the mayor for the floor and who the mayor grants the floor to.
But I shouldn't be granting the floor to someone else if Rick wants or Kyle wants to speak again. They've just spoken, someone else speaks, and then they want to speak again.
Correct. It should just go to each counselor should have the
And
opportunity to
that's
speak before.
during the debate.
That's not big, because that's not deliberation.
Deliberations, I think, are gonna be a little bit looser, but I do think that they have become a little bit clunky, and so it's worth keeping in mind that we still don't want to be interrupting people. We still need to ask the mayor for the floor. The mayor still needs to grant the floor before you can speak, even during deliberations.
Well, and I think there's been sort of this devolution into the need to have discussion and respond to each other. So again, you would be asking the mayor permission, for instance, if Councilman Schreiber wants to respond to something that either the councilwoman said, he's going to say, Mr. Mayor, may I have the floor to respond to Councilwoman Rule? And the mayor is gonna say, can I have the nature of your response? I mean, he has the ability to kind of control what that's going to be, because it's really not a time for back and forth. So that's another thing to really think about. And that's all the more reason to really be prepared when you come into the meeting ahead of time. So there's not, and to really think when you're up there and pause for a minute of, do I really need to respond to this? Because if you're responding only to restate what you already said, don't do it. You've already said what you needed to say. Let the other council people have their opportunity to speak.
Kind of
So,
reminds me of something I learned in law school. Louder is not more convincing.
so I guess, so I know that there's been a number of times, because I'm the longest standing council member, and sometimes I have historical context that comes up during that debating process. Then would I just call to the mayor and say, state that I have historical context that might be useful, even though I've already said my piece, but when another counselor states something, then
Yes,
that would be
And that would be in
appropriate.
deliberations.
Right, not during
Yes,
debate, but
yes.
yeah, because that's a kind of a one-time.
Mr.
thing.
Mayor, may I address some of the historical context of this for the rest of the council members?
Now, what if you want to ask a clarifying question of somebody after you've already spoken?
In debate or in
Deliberation.
deliberation?
Either one.
Deliberations is totally fair game.
Yeah.
Debate, it's sort of breaking the structure that's set forth in the rules where everybody just gets their one chance to say their piece. And so you would have to ask the mayor for the floor after that, and he would be entitled to deny you the floor because you've already had your opportunity to say your piece. And I hate saying you so often, I really should be sticking to my guns. But this is a little bit less formal, so.
We need to practice.
Right.
And it's good, in my opinion,
Person.
A council
Yeah,
person.
exactly. A council person, that is exactly right.
it's good practice. Obviously, I mean, if anyone's been to a bunch of council meetings at different venues, sometimes issues get really hard. And there's a clear division, and people will use some of the other rules you might go into to try to really, I'll say, use the rules as a weapon. That's not my intent, and I hope we never get there, but it's this balance of keeping an orderly, progressive meeting without being inefficient.
Well, and remember the purpose, the statutory purpose of a council meeting is for the citizens to observe the business of the city. It's, and if you keep the focus on, I am here to conduct the business of the city in an open public forum, and you keep your mindset and your lens on that, you won't go awry. The process will flow naturally.
We've kind of we stepped off script
Yeah.
here, but we can keep moving and keep going through the slide. So another type of motion, privileged motions. These would be the ones for like the recess. So if someone raises a point of order and Ms. Clerk and I don't know that someone else could move for recess, or we could ask, say, we would need a recess, in which case someone should move for a recess and we can answer that. I'll get into this in just a second, but these are for motions that don't relate to the main motion. So a good example of that one was for the question of privilege. So if there's like noise in the background when nobody can hear anything, you can ask a question of privilege, in which case you just deal with the noise. The reason it's the word privilege is because then it takes precedence over everything else. That's the only reason it uses the word privilege. But those are kind of good examples. Excess noise, inadequate ventilation, but also introduction of confidential subject. So if we stray into something that should be an executive session or is attorney-client privilege, someone should raise a question of privilege. And then in which case we can answer that and deal with it later.
Yes.
And then you can also call for the orders of the day, which is to help the mayor stay on track.
So question of privilege would come in during our land use, public judicial type hearings, because I feel like that has come up. So that would be appropriate if it's off topic for any one of the council members to call question privilege. And then once one of the counselors states that, then is law gonna kind of take over at that point because they've seen
So
where or?
yeah, I mean, we'll give our advice, yes. So, but those are two different ones, call for the orders of the day and the question of privilege. Calling for the orders of the day is how you want them to stay on track. And we don't have to use this language. This language is archaic and cumbersome,
Mhm.
but you can say, I move for us to remain on the issue that's presented before the council at this moment,
Mhm.
So do these motions of privilege have to be voted on as well, or can they just be moved and seconded?
They do have to be voted on. Everything, I mean, the whole principle of Robert's rules, and this is why they're a little bit cumbersome, because sometimes if there's water spilling out of the roof over there, we know we should take a recess. But technically, everything needs to be
Because
decided by majority.
we don't make a motion to adjourn.
And again, that's kind of why there's form and then there's substance. Incidental motions are point of orders similar to calling for the orders of the day. Point of orders asking an actual procedural question, calling for the orders of the day says, hey, let's stay on track. And then you actually can suspend the rules. That's kind of interesting. So you can move to suspend the rules and.
We do that.
We do that with ordinances.
Okay.
I was gonna say,
Sure,
we
yeah.
do that all the time.
Yeah, these motions are kind of self-explanatory, but also not. They're just a division of subsidiary motions. Then this is what just, this is the order of precedence. So privilege motions take precedence over everything, and the subsidiary motions. And then incidental motions aren't exactly they don't really have a place in the order of precedence because they're just incidental to a certain motion. Like, hey, can you clarify something for me or stuff like that. So, and we kind of, does anybody have any questions on the precedence of motions?
So that would say, Zach, then if there's a main motion in front of the dais, then if somebody asked for a privilege motion, that would stop any discussion on the main motion first, right? We'd then address the privileged motion once we dispense to that, then we'd come back to the main motion.
Correct. And even if there's a subsidiary motion, so if there's a main motion and a motion to amend, and you're talking about the second motion to amend, a privileged motion gets made, that takes precedence.
I dare somebody to make a motion to adjourn while there's a pending motion.
That, yeah.
We're out of
motion.
I'm just.
We'll have to try that.
Just out of curiosity though, when the next meeting started, wouldn't you bring up
Yes.
that same question? So you're not really killing the
No.
question, you're just postponing it.
Plus it requires a vote.
It does require, but it's kind of funny.
But that's another example of why the rules get clunky and why it's substance over form. And actually to circle back on that, why we don't want to weaponize the rules. Because you really probably could weaponize the rules and make a motion to adjourn. And if there was a majority of people that wanted to do that, it would get messy and just.
I believe that happened in Spokane last year. There's somebody made a motion to table it. And I'm no expert at Robert's rules, as you're all aware. Yes, the person moving to table the motion is someone who can bring it back. Something to this effect, and it was a huge budgetary issue, and they effectively killed it. Moving to table it, and the other people didn't know that.
Probably
So
had
they
a time
voted-
restriction.
So they voted on table, everybody voted to table it.
Yep.
And then
Not really,
That's-
not realizing that that person is the only person who can bring it back.
I did not realize that.
And I might not have the factor. It was something akin to that. where-
It could be, but and the other thing about tabling and postponing, and I don't know if you came across that, but that's something that came up a couple of years ago. Where tabling is something you table it during the meeting, bring it back during the meeting, where postponing is postponing to another meeting.
yes, that's a good distinction.
Well, and then there's a number of those that by Idaho code require them to be moved to a date certain. So
Yes.
you have to establish the date right then for when it's coming back.
It feels like we misused table then because.
It's easy to, it's easy to
we've
confuse.
tabled to move to the next meeting where
Yeah.
it should be postponed to
Yeah.
move to the next meeting.
Yeah, we've done it before. And again, former.
So we've discussed this. So this is the steps for a motion. So again, make the motion, second it, chair gives the floor. Then the person that makes the motion gets to speak first. Then every counselor gets an opportunity, and then the person that made the motion is the only person that gets the second crack at the apple. They get to speak last as well.
And this is where I go back to, don't include in your motion all the reasons why you're making the motion, because you're going to be the first person to offer the reasons why. So make your motion, and then the mayor's going to ask whoever made the motion to offer their thoughts and opinions, questions. You're gonna have your opportunity to speak then.
And just, if you're savvy, you get the opportunity to speak after everybody's spoken to.
Right.
So you can save most of your debate for everybody to have gone.
They're gonna be fighting over making motions now.
And just for another historical perspective, I don't know if Deb recalls this, but there was a time where, at least with this one certain council, where it was regularly that the mayor would call for a motion or and it would be the council president who would always make the motion,
Oh, interesting.
almost always make the motion. And then someone would second. But I remember that was something that was regular. It was almost like a courtesy where they would wait to see if the president would make the motion. If she didn't, then someone else would, but it was fairly regular that she would make the motion.
Yes, I think that's right at the beginning.
Ego. And we've gone over these as well. These are the debate rules. It's basically kind of common sense. But I would stress the formality. Because I do think that sort of naturally makes all of these other rules fall into place. If you have any questions, just.
I'll highlight one because we've touched on it. Debate the motion, not motive. So that goes back to my previous commentary of this is not, your position on the dais is not for you to grandstand your political alignment or your motives behind why you're going to vote a certain way. debating the actual facts that are before you and standards of approval that you need to either meet or deny whatever's in front of you, and no personal attacks.
And as I just will bring up for, public hearings, land use matters, finding of facts, conclusions of law should come out during
Deliberations.
deliberations.
Yes, so because it's very complicated to make a motion on a land use related matter where you include in the motion all of your findings, you could have, like a CUP, you could have 9 standards of approval that you're trying to apply facts to. So it's really important in your deliberations to comment on how the facts you heard in the public hearing support or don't support these standards of approval that you're being asked to consider. We as in staff, the proverbial staff, planning staff, us, we will pick out of that transcript your findings that you articulate for the written decision. So you don't have to worry about getting all of those into your motion. You can simply say in the motion, we usually put this in front of you, motion to approve, PC, blah, 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 blah. Because I find that it meets all of the standards of approval as articulated in the staff report, and then any additional things you think of. So you'll have a standard motion in front of you. But it's important in your deliberations that you don't just go down the line and say, yeah, it looks good. Well, how and why? And what facts did you hear that helped you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, and for probably not Deb, but for some of you newer folks, the best I ever saw was a gentleman named John O'Hare. He would literally take the audience one direction where you're like, folks voting this way, and then he would flip back and say, in consideration of all that, also considering this, this, and this, and this. So he actually acknowledged one side fully and said, here's all the valid points that they made. I think all these valid points are even more important and overweighted.
Yeah.
So from the audience perspective, you're like, yeah, right. Those are all the points. These are all the points. And it wasn't just, yeah, because I feel this way. It was really wonderful to watch.
And that's a beautiful example of weighing the evidence. So I've had a lot of council members ask me, well, what do I do when a citizen comes up in public comment and they have some part of this project is going to genuinely affect them? Well, you have to weigh that and you need to articulate, if you're going to give that one citizen more weight than an applicant who has property rights, then you had better be able to very clearly articulate why that one person, why you're giving more weight. Where you can say, I appreciate what Mr. Citizen had to say. I appreciate that this is going to affect them. However, this application does meet all of the standards of approval. So you can recognize them. You can recognize the validity of what they had to say without giving them actually more weight than they deserve. And that's really hard because especially when your citizens come here to take the time to provide public comment. The other thing is, I don't know if you guys have had my land use related, you two anyways, but maybe you 3 haven't. I know Deb has. The land use presentation that I do where we walk through the due process rights and the private property rights and how you should be evaluating evidence when it comes to you in a public hearing. I don't think you've had that, but anyways, part of that discussion is really understanding how to weigh the evidence when it comes to you and understanding, we got to have a private conversation about this, how you are restricted to what's presented to you in the record. You don't get to go outside the record and do your own investigation on anything. You don't get to bring in your own professional experience on anything. You are restricted to what is presented to you in that record. If you make a decision specifically to deny outside of the record that was before you, you just teed up an appeal.
So land use would typically go through planning and zoning first. I presume it, go ahead.
No, but you are the final decision maker on most. So you're gonna get a recommendation of approval or denial from.
But I presume in that meeting, planning and zoning, they've looked at the standards to go assess whether or not they're in violation of any And in fact, if they were, I would imagine there wouldn't be a recommendation for it to come to council. Maybe not.
That's correct. You'd probably get a recommendation for denial with all of the reasons why.
Yeah.
But remember, because you haven't seen this or heard this yet, so I'll say remember or hey, FYI.
Yeah.
Idaho code requires that if you're going to deny a land use application, you also have to tell them what they can do differently to be successful. You're required. So it's a lot, land use is a lot, and maybe we should talk about a training.
That would be
Yeah,
very
I like-
helpful.
I like that.
Yeah, we haven't really had anything, especially complex controversial.
I did do this training with planning and zoning that we could probably find the video of and at
Oh,
least
that'd be
give
good.
them that to
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah.
I've done it a couple times.
Absolutely.
So that would be helpful probably.
Yeah.
Without going too far down this rabbit hole, can you use something that was brought up during the planning and zoning hearing as evidence in the council meeting? Okay,
Yes.
so like if I watch the planning and zoning meeting and say, well, in the planning and zoning meeting, the applicant said this, or something like that, or,
So that's part of the record.
It's part of the
Yeah,
record.
okay,
So the
yeah,
planning and
it's
zoning
not-
process is part of the record. So,
okay,
and you should watch any land use decision that comes to you that has gone to planning and zoning before you, you should watch the entirety of the planning and zoning.
yeah, that's my standard, but I didn't know if I could actually say that. No, I came in here thinking this because I watched the planning and zoning, you know?
On a land use related matter, I guess I could be taken out of context, sure. I came in here thinking this. You want to be careful not ever to say, I came in here planning to vote X, Y, or Z.
Right,
Because the whole point is you have to come in with an open mind and undecided.
and that's why I was asking the question.
And seriously, think of yourself as a judge. I mean, you can't be partial, you can't have your decision. Obviously, you kind of know where you're leaning internally, but you can't express that outwardly, where you're leaning, what decision you're gonna make. You need to objectively hear all of the information from both sides. You can't gather information. You really shouldn't be talking to the applicant in the parking lot, gathering information ahead of time.
Well, and this is what we were talking about earlier, where sometimes the grandstanding or the excessive deliberation can create liability. So if you end up deliberating on a contract or a legislative matter where you are now expressing your philosophical beliefs about growth, and it becomes very clear that you are anti-growth, developers can use that to come in here and ask you to recuse yourselves. They can say, I cannot get an objective view from council member X, and here's all the evidence that I have of his or her comments from the dais over the last 6 months. You can be creating a place of bias that can eliminate you from being able to vote later. And we've had it happen, not here, not since I've been here, but in other cities. So you want to be really, really careful that you're not inadvertently creating a record of bias by deliberating excessively over other matters.
Yeah, and on that point, I would also bring up, there are countless lawsuits that have been lost and won because council members think, I mean, they start to act informally and will lean over and say, ha, 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 or say something. Those microphones, the transcribable record will pick it up. I was involved in a tort claim where a county commissioner said, I can't hear a thing. I flew airplanes, I'm deaf. And it was a petition against a CUP for noise violations. There's one down, I think it was Ada, Idaho County, where they said something about a applicant just between two council members. It's a multi-million-dollar lawsuit because they had said that. So not to make it stuffy and, you know, super strict, but those mics are on, everything's recorded and can be used.
Let's go one step further. We're a little off base. This also goes to any comments on social media and or websites that you may have. I don't know what any of you have. I don't monitor any of your social media. It will come to me if you post something, or it'll come to Zach or I where we have to interject. But the other difficult part is everything you post online or you say online or you are quoted in an article is, as a council person, even connected to you as a council person, is part of what has to be captured as public records for these guys to maintain. And that just creates a monumentous problem. And so, I'd love to have an absolute ban on any commenting on social media, but of course you all have First Amendment rights as individuals. But what you should have on any website or social media platform where you are vocal is an absolute disclaimer that these are my own individual opinions, are not reflective of the city, are not connected to me as a council person. I mean, like a very robust disclaimer. And even then, I would say be very, very careful. Because the other thing that creates, if you're posting consistent with philosophical or political beliefs, is an absolute evidentiary of potential bias that can be used against you. And you literally were elected to vote. So that's what I say is don't do things that take you out of your ability to vote. That's what you were elected to do. Sorry, I digress. I don't ever get to just lecture, so.
So I think on this one, again, these are kind of self-explanatory. I will just hit the complex amendment. I suggest, I mean, we can make, you can make complex amendments. That's allowed, and there's ways to navigate through Robert's rules when to do that. It just seems to me a lot easier to rescind and start over rather than amend and amend. Just, yeah. So.
Well, you've asked before, what am I voting on?
I asked a lot after.
Yeah.
that.
Well, and that's a good reason why we separate deliberations and debate and make the motion after we've had enough deliberation to have a clear and concise motion. So everybody knows, even if you don't have to be in consensus on how you're gonna vote, but what you're voting on. Those are two
Yeah,
different
and
decisions.
just historical context, that never happened before. I always knew what the motion was and what I was voting on before, because all of it happened before and then the motion was made and it didn't get confusing. So.
Do you think this will help?
Oh, absolutely. It was
Going
way,
back to deliberation
it
versus
made,
debate.
yeah, it worked way better before, because sometimes the debate is so long. I mean, you know, what, 90 minutes later, we're back to voting on, I don't remember what the motion was by the time all that happened, so.
Well, and it is worth keeping in mind, like, what is the question at hand? I mean, is this worth staff's time to be here for an hour debating this, or should we just kind of move through it? I mean, it is worth just keeping that in the back of your mind. Because there are gonna be some that will take an hour and a half. And then others, you know,
And they're more
staff may have been having
procedural.
line whether or not to put on consent, and all of a sudden we're spending an hour and a half on it, and it's like, it's happening. So it's just worth keeping that in the back too. Any other questions with challenges? I think we're kind of getting through this off script here, but it's.
So does a violation of Robert's Rules of Order that is identified after the meeting in any way upset or void the underlying action that was taken?
So I have flirted with that question. I haven't dove into it because I frankly think it's a complex question, but I think the answer is not really. So I think
That's fine.
if there's a procedural issue and if it's brought up during the meeting, then I think that's a different question. But the decision was brought to the council made a decision. They knew what the motion was. They knew what they were deciding. And so I don't think that, but again, I haven't taken a deep dive into that, even though I was tempted to.
You send this,
Yes. Yes. Ask Madam Clerk to do it because she can.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Well, I think if any of you, I mean, and maybe we consider ordering some of these. They're still very robust, but they are, but they're not this.
That's what I primarily used for the PowerPoint. I mean, I use this for my own edification.
That would be great if we
Yeah.
could have those.
Sure.
yeah.
Invite people parliamentary inquiries. I think that will clean up a lot of confusion. Just so when there's confusion, ask.
I have a question about the presiding officer being impartial and participating in debate or deliberation. when is that appropriate, when it's not?
I mean, it's typically not appropriate for the presiding officer to participate in debate. That's not the point. But there's a lot of gray area where the presiding officer, while presiding over a motion in the sort of shadows, is going to be participating in the debate. So
Keep going, but I do.
Right. Go ahead.
So just to be clear, debate as opposed to
Deliberation.
deliberation.
And I'm saying debate,
You're saying debate.
not.
Okay, and what about
I
deliberation?
think the presiding officer should primarily remain neutral, and just preside over the debate, because the presiding officer doesn't have a vote unless there's a tie.
I think the difficulty, under the municipal context, especially in Idaho, is that the presiding officer, i.e. the mayor, has the opportunity to bring items to you for consideration. He naturally has a right to have an opinion in his explanation of why he's bringing it to you. So I think that's a little, sort of stray a little bit from the strictness of Robert's Rules of Orders when it's paired with Idaho code and what is allowed by a mayor specifically. And Idaho code is going to trump this, supersede this any day. So
So it would be appropriate to express all that opinion more in the deliberations or state a case. And then not necessarily be a part of the debate because there's not a vote.
Well, and to be clear, if the mayor's bringing the motion, the issue to
the action item,
the action item, then presumably the mayor's position is going to be implied.
Exactly. Yeah, it wouldn't be on the agenda otherwise, which is why I'm asking, when is it appropriate to participate? Since the preferred outcome is implied.
I think it's important when the person bringing the action item in front of you for consideration needs to clarify facts. And so I have seen
Hi, Cass.
examples where council has strayed quite far away from the actual true facts of a certain topic, and he has brought you back to council, please remember that, and then walked through facts. It's not a place to argue with you by any means. It's to give you the facts to make a decision. So I would say when he feels that factually there's a misunderstanding, and especially when it's an action item brought by him, he absolutely can provide that information.
I guess I'm recalling a time with the previous mayor where he was absolutely advocating for a certain outcome in a vote after a
We take no
motion had been made.
responsibility.
I'm just asking, like, when is it appropriate, when
Yeah.
when is it not? What is appropriate, what's not, and I get your point that it's stating the facts, like, this is why I brought this agenda item to you. That makes sense, yeah.
But I want you all to have the best information that you have to make a decision, so.
Sure.
I can imagine times where something comes up, I might, interject or try to give you some additional information. But I will tell you, I'll try as hard as I can not to, especially during debate, not to.
Well, and certainly because of your professional background, you have some information that a lot of us don't, right?
Yeah, right, so I won't try to. During debate. I might. Say, councilman, do you have anything to say? But I won't try to sway you. in that regard.
Pretty close to the end. Oh, and obviously public hearings are a little different.
Mm.
And so the big one with this one is ex parte. Facts and ex parte communications. It's just an absolute, don't do it. It's easy to find out, especially these days, whether or not it happened. Don't even talk to the applicant. And then keep in mind that a lot of these land use issues, the neighbors have standing as well. So a denial is gonna, half the time, or oftentimes, or an approval rather, will initiate a lawsuit as well by the neighbors who might have standing over an issue. So it's just really important to keep your decision confined to the record and limit the information that you might otherwise gather, because it's just so common sense to be like, well, I'm just gonna go drive
Drive by and
this,
walk the
yeah,
property.
but
I mean, you can't help it, when you live in a small town, that you may have driven by a property for 10 years. and then you know that it's there, but that's not considered.
That's very different. So there's the concept of common knowledge. So I mean,
Yeah.
if it's like, if the lawsuits or the issues about Schweitzer, you're gonna know where chair one is and everything like that. And that's gonna be common knowledge. And so that's different than even with your knowledge of whatever it is, for example, Schweitzer, if the hearing were going and you went and walked the property with the hearing in mind, that would be a
That's-
different
yeah,
question
exactly.
than just having driven past it for the last 20 years.
Cause some of these things we make decisions on, they're, you know, so you gotta drive past them to get to your house, or you gotta, you know, so.
And then it just starts haunting you.
So some of
Yeah,
the
no
other,
luck.
some of the other problematic commentary I've heard during public hearings is around, it's always around traffic, right? So people or council members who will say, well, I drive this road all the time and, you know, this traffic light is backed up every single morning and every single night, and it takes me 5 minutes to get through this intersection, blah, blah, blah. If that information did not come in at all during the public hearing, you should not be articulating it during deliberations. You cannot deliberate it. You can't use your own personal experience because there's due process rights involved here. And part of protecting due process is having in our code requirements for traffic impact analysis and traffic studies. The experts get to comment on traffic. You have to rely on the information that's been given to you by the experts, and that's in your staff report. You don't get to comment or use any of your own personal experience for a decision point.
And one thing about looking at property, sometimes walking, you see those public hearing signs. You stop and read the
Oh, yeah.
public hearing sign and there's the property. I mean, that's just, I'm always curious when I see one of those, what's this, you know, what? But that's not something you have to ex parte.
I mean, again, I think from a practical standpoint, if there's kind of a hearing that's been noticed up, because you have a little bit more time on the notice of those, maybe just stay away from the property. So that you can even avoid the appearance of, the ex parte information, having someone say, well, I saw the city council member walk right past the property 2 days before the hearing.
Or I saw Pam standing out there reading the sign.
Well,
and
yeah,
was
that's
close to the
what-
property.
that's what
Even if-
I have done.
Even if it is just the normal course.
Right.
So, but you are allowed to continue living your life.
Before
And if
knowing
you-
that it was coming.
So that's just kind of being prudent. I mean, you're certainly entitled to walk past the property if you do it every day, or even if you don't do it every day. It's just, it can't be for the purposes of gathering information. And there is a line, or there is a gray area where, like, well, appearances are gonna make it look like you're gathering information, so maybe just kind of step away from the cliff.
And you can always, if you don't feel like you have enough information, that's a great reason to continue hearing. And you don't even have to make a decision that night. I frequently seen planning commissions and councils just get bombarded with comment and facts and figures. And there seems to be this pressure like, oh my gosh, now we gotta make a decision. It's totally fine to say, I've heard a lot tonight. I need to sleep on this. I need to digest what I've heard. I move to continue this to a time certain. And if you have the support of the rest, you go home that night. All we're required to do that night is have a hearing. You don't have to make a decision that night.
And that is 100% true. You cannot go gather additional information. The hearing's
Right.
closed.
You
You
can think about
can, between then, you can talk to staff if you have questions. But then when you come back on the record, you would say, I spoke with Brandon and asked these questions and he clarified some things for me so that it's at least part of your deliberations of what you did.
And then you can always review the record. So
Yeah.
at these hearings, you're gonna get dumped with thousands of pages of information sometimes. And then after you've heard from someone, you can always spend time, as much time as you want with the record. That's completely fair game, including planning and zoning commission meetings, all the staff reports, everything that was presented.
And sometimes also making a decision with a room full of people. That's what I see all the time. You got 100 people in a room who are angry and want this thing approved or denied. And you have this pressure like, oh my gosh, look at all these people, but you know, say, okay, now I'm gonna objectively look at the facts, record, the comment, okay. And you don't have that pressure of 100 people.
Definitely in danger of taking this down a rabbit hole, but can you use public record from other hearings in your decision making?
No.
No.
Okay. So you can't say, well, we approved something like this the other day.
A great question. No, you cannot. It's that record. So when it comes to you, you have from the date of, from staff report that was published before planning and zoning through the planning and zoning hearing, then the staff report that you received, and now typically your own public hearing or public meeting, typically, it all depends on what it is. And then that's it. That's your record.
Thanks.
Again, I think we've kind of gone over most of this. This is common sense. So, I would, the practice I would kind of hit here is just the, keep in mind substance over form. And the point of the substance is, did the majority make the decision that was in front of that was in front of? That's really kind of where we're going. And did we make a record, did we make a clear record that the clerk can use? So everything else just sort of helps affect that.
Question, when we call for the vote, when we do a roll call vote, yes and no are appropriate. Can you abstain?
Yeah.
At that point, no.
Unless you have a conflict.
Conflict, yes. In that case, yes.
You have a legal obligation
Obligation to vote.
Yeah. We've touched on these, and these are just common motions. I got this out of this, little pamphlet, so.
Adjourn one, we're gonna have to try that.
And on that, that previous question, I think you're probably all aware, but Melissa, the random order is getting called first and second, I think, you know.
Changes.
Yep. So you can't wait and see how they're gonna vote or vote this way, this person votes this way.
Every once in a while, I really cross my fingers on lines. I have done that twice in my whole career. I'm like, I really hope I'm one of the last.
Up to the list randomizer.
Yeah, yeah, I know it's random, so I never know where you're gonna fall.
I have a council person in another city who notoriously asks, if called first, to please move on to the next person and let her go last.
Oh, my goodness.
Is the answer
Not
no?
over.
Questions?
It's very informative.
After I look at that again, you get this good.
Feel free to reach out. This was really informative for me. Like I said, I spent time with this book, so I learned a lot, so. Feel free to reach out if you do have questions. And I also learned that there's a lot that I don't know and won't bother.
Yeah.
So,
There are people who are experts.
Yes.
This is their profession.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The procedures.
they don't have real exciting lives. do they?
Thank you.
Haley's already on it. She's getting these ordered for you.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Oh, the little, okay.
I would entertain a motion. to
If they
adjourn.
could stay on the council dais, they might help the other. Well, during planning commission and during the other.
Just stay on the dais. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
That would be, if they're just, everybody's, you have a question, you look it up.
I
We
like that.
have to train the planning commission too.
Well,
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Howard, second by
No.
Rule. Those in favor? Is adjourned at 6:55 PM.